Hi, and welcome to RBP on JSB. I'm violinist Rachel Barton Pine, and today we're going to be discussing the fourth and final movement of Bach's Sonata No. 2 in A minor, the Allegro. By the way, if you want to hear a discussion about some of the general topics that pertain to all of the movements of the Bach Sonatas and Partitas, please be sure to watch the overview episode. So this Allegro is in cut time. That doesn't mean it has to be like super speedy, but it gives you some information about feel. In other words, that you should really think of each measure as being driven by the half note rather than the quarter note. So if your tendency is to play it like with quarter note beats, maybe you should rethink that tendency. Well, of course, there it's obvious because of all the echoes, but later on when it gets going, just really think of the big beat rather than, right? Just no matter what your tempo is, always remember that it's in 2. And of course, your tempo is really easily determined by the 32nd notes. Seems like it's an innocent 16th note movement, but then not quite. Measure 3 is where they start off. Of course, I used to do the old-fashioned bowing of slurring every run pony in a single slur. And then I thought, well, that's not so pleasing musically, so I did different slurs, which is how I would want to phrase it. And then I thought, well, maybe I'll be really radical and not add slurs that Bach didn't put in his piece. And actually, that feeling made me realize it's not. So instead, I phrase it now. Which actually makes so much sense, and it is comfortable once you get the hang of it to do all those separate bows, and it gives the movement a certain kind of energy, which actually flows very nicely out of the andante if you do the andante with separate bows. It all kind of seems like it fits together. So the movement is really only 1, 2. Now, Bach did write slurs a few times. There's a really interesting one in 27, which is so nice, and it actually comes out more obviously and is therefore more special if you haven't added unnecessary slurs leading up to that fourth beat in 27. The really now jumps out to the ear. It's also important to do a lot of shaping with notes that don't have any 30 seconds or slurs or anything else to tell you what they might be going to, supposed to be going to do. So if you look at measure 7 through 13, nothing but 30 seconds, no dynamics, no anything. So the question is, how would you group these notes? And of course, it's easier to figure that out by singing than by playing, because then you aren't distracted by, fourth fingers and string crosses and extensions and all the other stuff that can make you phrase from a physical perspective instead of a musical one. Of course, it is true that sometimes the physicality of the music will drive the shape, but often not necessarily. So let's see what's going on here. Well, that's not really the pitches because I can't quite sing those notes, but let's talk about what I think I just did. So 5-note group. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then the next 3 are a pickup to the next 5-note group. And then I don't do that as a 5-note group, because I want to kind of have a phrase here, and that's too many little phrases, so I kind of do this as a group of 9, and then a group of 7 leading, and then a group of 3, another group, Okay, so there's actually quite a bit of variety with the shape of all of these different notes. Let's speed that up. So I had a group of 5, then 3 notes leading to a group of 5, 3 notes leading to a group of 9, 7 notes leading to a group of 3, and then 5 notes leading to another group of 3. I'm sure there's any number of other ways that you could group these notes, but the point is you got to do something. You can't just go along and have a bunch of beats. Because that's just so much less interesting than it could be. You're losing the whole potential for bringing this music to life if you haven't made lots of little phrases. And by the way, little phrases, but also think about the big picture. So the sequence starting at 9, where it's the same kind of note shapes, but going down a step every half bar. You might want to start it at a higher point dynamically. So you kind of each one a little less. So here I have a group of 7 and then 9, and then that's kind of an arrival point. And what should we do for a bowing there? If we do what's in the manuscript, we get all backwards. Backwards is sometimes fine, but in this case, not so much. And if we do down bow, I mean, I can kind of pull it off, but it doesn't, I can make it sound passable, but it doesn't feel very good. So I actually take another up right here. I think that some editions do things like break up the long slurs. But I don't think that's quite as good of a solution, because then you lose the sweep. Just take another up, and then slur across over the A string, just kind of fake it. And you could go to third position, which would be a little unbaroque, but then you still are going across the D string. So what is that saying? In for a penny, in for a pound. You might as well stay in first position and cross over 2 strings while you're at it. And then keep the dancey feel by not doing any hooks or anything like that. Please don't be tempted to do that. And then I jump to second here, because this is a case where too much first position would be really a little too much. So, and of course, stretching to second and right back down. In the Baroque era, they would often just kind of reach their fingers and not even shift. 2, 4, 2, 1. Remembering to keep a little bit of inner phrasing so you're not. Another place where I would recommend having the separate bows in 19 rather than hooks. Just kind of jump your bow down. And speaking of bows off the string, of course, do think about when you're going to be on the string, off the string at any given point in this music. Now, here is a spot where he does give you some slurs, measure 47, but it comes so late in the piece that I think he's just giving you some variety, doing something different in that moment. And then here's our old friend, measure 48, which is similar to measure 14, and where I use the same solution. Yeah, so he's doing lots of fun things with the bowings. I would also be sure to show the slurs. In other words, when you are playing slurs, don't just kind of do them, but point them out. So measure 43, not just, because then you might as well just, you haven't really done anything special with it, but showing them as little miniature note groupings, 3, 1, 2, 2, 3, 1, 3. So little bit of a cadence there, by the way. You could take a little bit of time. Nice C major, but not for long. So when figuring out your dynamics, of course, definitely listen for your harmonies, listen for your sequences, if the notes rising or getting less, and sometimes you have little major key moments like 35. Sometimes you have some bass notes and a sequence going down. All of these things are pretty obvious, and I love it that in this movement Bach actually gives us some dynamics, one of the rare times, and most of them are these little echoes. So one thing that I always like to keep in mind is the timing of the echoes, because if you think about it, just doing it absolutely strictly metronomically might not be as rhetorical as if you think about what a harpsichord player does when they do echoes. You might be thinking to yourself, well, how can a harpsichord do echoes? It's an instrument of one volume. There are no pedals. Well, what they do is they use the two keyboards, and they'll play a lick on the bottom keyboard and then the same lick on the top keyboard. If you've ever seen somebody do the Goldberg variations and go between keyboards and all of that, it's fascinating how they voice it. It's almost like what you think of organists doing. And so there's that infinitesimal split second where they have to get from one keyboard to the next, and it's not exactly on time, and that timing is almost built into the feel of the music. So I like to kind of imitate that sort of approach here in this movement. So instead of just having it all kind of smush into each other, I try to have it be a bit more poised. Something like that, or maybe not even as exaggerated. But basically, so I'm setting each new iteration of these little musical moments. There's one more dynamic that he has in here, and that, of course, is the wonderful piano in measure 56. I love this dynamic because if he hadn't put it in there, I don't know if all of us would have thought of it. Maybe some of us would have had the idea, but others of us might not have. So, let's imagine that it wasn't in there. We might have thought of, measures 54 and 55 leading to 56 and then 56 soaring. Well, that's actually the point. We do want the audience to feel like we're going to 56, and then the piano is a surprise subito piano. So as much as possible, set up your audience's expectations to make them think that 56 is going to be a climactic moment. And then surprise them. It's such a fun thing to do. And then I love that last note. It reminds me of that low harpsichord note at the end of the first movement of the B minor Sonata No. 1 for violin and harpsichord, where there's just that bomb, that low note that kind of is slightly delayed and has so much weight. There's one other movement where he does this, and I'm trying to think which one it is. Oh, yes, of course. The last movement of the preceding work, the last note of the double of the tempo de Buria that ends the B minor partita No. 1. So anyway, that's 2 times that Bach does that wonderful thing with the last low note. So make sure you make it into something really special and not just kind of barrel on ahead. So those are some of my thoughts about the Allegro in A minor by Bach. Thanks for watching RBP on JSB. I'm Rachel Barton Pine.